Well, good morning. Good morning, everybody. Firstly, good morning, ladies and gentlemen, members of the Churchill family, Churchillians. Welcome. Welcome to Edinburgh. Welcome to Scotland. And I'm glad to say, welcome still to the United Kingdom. Someone once said that even the rain cannot dampen Edinburgh's beauty, which is a theory I'm absolutely sure you'll be able to put to the test at some point by having this conference in Edinburgh in October. As a Scotsman born a little over 30 miles from here in Stirling, it gives me great pleasure to have this, our 40th International Churchill Conference here in Scotland's capital city. The team have been working extremely hard, as always, to bring you what we hope is a programme that combines exclusive access to some of Edinburgh's world-class venues that this city has to offer, and also a panel of expert speakers here today for the academic sessions, and we will explore Churchill's relationship with Scotland. I hope that any of you who were at, or most of you who were at the Royal Yacht Britannia last night had a wonderful evening, and of course we set the bar very high with the opening cocktail party. But the only thing we learned from that, and that we can suggest as an improvement for the weekend, is that we've hired all the bus drivers from last night to be our tour guides for the rest of the weekend. So, obviously none of them have visited the delights of the Royal Yacht before. It's the first time for everyone. Anyway, as always, Churchill says it best, and Churchill did visit Edinburgh during the Second World War in 1942 on October 12th, and he was little over 100 yards from where we're all sat now in the wonderful Usher Hall at the other side of Lothian Road. And Churchill said on that day, "I have myself some ties with Scotland, which are to me of great significance, ties precious and lasting. First of all, I decided to be born on St Andrew's Day, and it was to Scotland that I went to find a wife, who is deeply aggrieved not to be here today through temporary indisposition. I commanded a Scottish battalion of the famous 21st Regiment for 5 months in the line in France in the last war, and I sat for 15 years as a representative of Bonnie Dundee, and I might be sitting for it still if the matter had rested entirely with me." The city of Dundee, which is Churchill's former constituency, is a little over 50 miles north of Edinburgh. And if anyone does have any free time and wishes to visit, it's become quite a dynamic city. It's become quite a vibrant place. It's had a great regeneration. We now have a branch of the Victoria and Albert Museum there. The Discovery is there, so it's become quite a vibrant city. And they say that Dundee is famous for 3 things beginning with the letter J, and that is jute, jam, and journalism. Now, the jute mills have all gone, but thankfully Dundee cake and Dundee marmalade are still thriving. But more importantly, journalism is still going strong, and we have some of that journalistic expertise here today or on our later panel session. If anyone does want to go up, there's an excellent railway service from Edinburgh Waverley, and of course it takes you up over the Forth Rail Bridge, which is an excellent journey. So if you do have some free time, it's not far, about an hour's journey. Now, I want to introduce someone, and I've written down in big exclamation marks that this may be something that I do for the last time. And he is the current chairman of the International Churchill Society, a chairman who has been the driving force behind this organisation for 20 years, possessing all the Churchillian qualities of leadership, inspiration, ambition, and a man of action that this organisation has indeed led us to follow in his wake. There's certainly been lots of toil and sweat as we tried to keep up with him. Thankfully, no blood or tears yet. Laurence.
Thank you, Scott. There's been plenty of tears over the years. I've just broken something, okay. There's been plenty of tears, but over 2 decades that I've had the privilege of an honour of being ICS's chairman, and it's a privilege and an honour. It's given me far more than I've given it, and I will not miss having to sit and worry about bus drivers. and I do want to say Scott has been the very stanchion in the UK that has given us the comfort and the reliance that we could take ICS in the United Kingdom to its well-deserved place, which you'll hear more about today. And Scott, I thank you for your calmness, your can-do attitude, your friendship, and your absolute stupidity in taking this on. However, in a matter of 2 or 3 minutes, my time is up. I don't think, frankly, many people convicted in this country get 20 years. So I've served my time. And it's truly, 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 truly a pleasure to introduce you to the next chairman of the International Churchill Society. He's a man I've known, respected, and admired for more than 20 years, this fellow Mitchell Reash. It took me and the whole board a long time to persuade Mitchell to do this job. And let me give you an idea of the commitment he's making. Not only is he taking the job on, but he's moving, he and his wonderful, beautiful wife, Elizabeth, to London by the end of this year to do the job properly. That's commitment. So let me tell you about Mitchell's extraordinary attributes and career, for I stand in bewildered awe at all that he is and has done. He's been an ambassador for the United States, and in no easy circumstances, as you can read from his bio or let's talk to him. He didn't get anything easy. He's been an advisor, and still is, to the British government. He's been a university president. He was the CEO of a major foundation that was so very important, still is so very important to the very fabric of the United States, Colonial Williamsburg. He's testified for Congress and Parliament. He's written 3 important and very well-respected books and more than 100 significant articles on history, international relations, and nuclear weapons, and I believe that went down like a bomb. Mitchell had previously agreed to be a vice chairman with Phil Beckman and Steve Poss, and we didn't frighten him off enough, so finally he enthusiastically, I will say, willingly took on the role of chairman. And let me tell you the qualities he has, which are true Churchillian. He has charm, eloquence, boldness, determination, vision, compassion, integrity, empathy. He never accepts the status quo as a given. He always looks to history to inform the future. He has resilience. And Churchill said, never gives in, and that's Mitchell, but he never gives up. He's bicontinental in so many ways, having been educated on both sides of the Atlantic and lived on both sides. And he always makes hard work and problem solving look effortless, despite the stresses and complexities. All of us should never forget that Churchill said, courage is rightly considered the foremost of the virtues, for upon it all others depend. Importantly for all of us here and all the members of ICS and the followers of ICS around the world, Mitchell Reash, your new chairman, has an abundance of great courage. He will carry Churchill's banner with relish, pride, and dignity. And I have no doubt whatsoever he will lead ICS in fulfilling its much-needed mission. And together we will all glory in the success and greatness our organization truly deserves. Mitchell, can you come on up here? It's in order to become an ex-chairman, which I've only dreamed of for 19 years and 364 days. My last official and probably my most pleasurable act in office is to hand the gavel to Mitchell Reash, both a great friend and a great man. So this is the man who will lead our society to the heights it deserves, and it will meet its much-needed role, never more needed than today, in freedom-loving societies. So let's join me in welcoming our talented and well-rounded, great courageous man, Mitchell Reash, ICS's new chairman, and I have left no forwarding address.
Well, thank you very much. That was a remarkable introduction, and yet another reason I'm so grateful to Laurence. We're going to have an opportunity a little bit later in the weekend's events to honor Laurence properly, but I want it noted that my first official act as chair is to ask everybody to recognize the brilliant leadership of Laurence Geller over the past 20 years for the ICS. And there's more to come, Laurence. On behalf of the Churchill Society and the Churchill family, I want to welcome everybody to beautiful Edinburgh with my wife, Elizabeth. And we're going to have a terrific few days here, starting very, very shortly. We'll have opportunities to talk a little bit later. I want to get the programming started, and so it's my pleasure to introduce our next speaker, Stephen Poss, who is a fellow board member, fellow Churchillian, great friend, and the generous donor of the Stephen and Jane Poss lecture, distinguished Churchill lecture. And Steve, come on up and introduce who that person is going to be this year.
Good morning, everyone. Good morning. It's truly wonderful to see so many Churchillians here in Edinburgh. This is the third in the series of the annual lecture programs that my wife Jane and I have sponsored. Our goal for this lectureship has been to provide a platform for scholars and experienced military and government officers and leaders to link the life, the legacy, and the lessons as through Winston Churchill in his times to the trials and decisions faced by the leaders of today and the leaders of tomorrow, and to inspire, if we can, citizens to face the future with essential and accurate knowledge of our history. Our first lecture in 2021 was Lord Andrew Roberts, author of Churchill, Walking with Destiny, author of perhaps the best biography ever written of Napoleon, and so many other works. Our second lecturer in 2022 was Tim Bouverie, a rising young historian and author of the acclaimed and most timely book, Appeasement, Chamberlain, Hitler, Churchill, and the Road to War. And this year we are just really pleased to present Captain Henry J. Jerry Hendrix, U.S. Navy, retired. Before I tell you a bit about Captain Hendrix, let me first explain what led to our selection of a former naval officer to be this year's distinguished lecturer. Churchill, the Navy, and Scotland are truly intertwined in history. If we were to go downstairs, leave this conference center, and drive north for 300 miles, we would reach Scapa Flow, an ancient harbor in the Orkneys, which sheltered the Viking fleets in the 11th and the 12th centuries, and became a place of profound importance in Winston Churchill's life. In October of 1911, Churchill became First Lord of the Admiralty and began to ready the Royal Navy for war, increasing naval spending, arguing that Britain needed more and more ships, building the most powerfully armed class of battleships in the world, changing over the Royal Navy from coal power to oil, and modernizing and improving the treatment of your ordinary seamen. He reiterated this call to arms in a speech in Glasgow in 2012, as he later recounted the considerable outcry in Germany in response to his speech about the need to grow the Royal Navy was matched only by a large proportion of the outraged English liberal press. By 1914, others in the government were arguing that he should step down because he kept bothering and haranguing people about defense spending and the need for it. After all, said Lloyd George, on New Year's Day, 1914, the prospects for world peace had never been better, and large military expenditures were a folly. Such, as Churchill was later to write, the milestones to Armageddon. Of course, within a year at midnight on August 4, 1914, England was to declare war on Germany, and Churchill that same night to order the Royal Navy to action stations. But where was the Grand Fleet that night? A week earlier, on July 28, convinced that war was imminent, and ever the man of action this day, and without really asking anyone's permission, Churchill secretly ordered the Grand Fleet of the Royal Navy to its war station at Scapa Flow and ordered them in a daring journey to sail in silence at night with no lights. He was later to describe this in The World Crisis. We may now picture this great fleet as darkness fell, 18 miles of warships running at high speed and in absolute blackness through the narrow straits, bearing with them into the broad waters of the north, the safeguard of considerable affairs. As Andrew Roberts has written, had Churchill died before 1939, he would principally be known as the man who got the Royal Navy ready for the Great War. But of course, he was very much alive and in his prime in 1939. And on October 14 of that year, shortly after midnight, he received word that a German U-boat had navigated a narrow and treacherous passage through the Orkneys into Scapa Flow, torpedoed one of the Royal Navy's great battleships, the Royal Oak, with more than 800 men lost. He was heartbroken, particularly because he had been arguing for quite some time of the need to safeguard the flow. He ordered the construction of additional works to do that, and today those works are actually motor causeways you can drive on, linking some of the Orkneys, and they are still known as the Churchill barriers. Even closer to where we sit now, only about a dozen miles today in the Firth of Forth, is the Rosyth dockyard, where in 1916 the Royal Navy cruiser squadrons sailed out to meet the Germans at the Battle of Jutland. So with that in mind, it seemed a naval theme would be appropriate for our talk this year. Not a week goes by this year without another article, another program, another talking head, another expert warning about the weak state of our navies, both American and Royal and NATO, in the face of the greatest naval buildup in history since the Second World War by China. Jerry Hendrix, our speaker this morning, was one of the first to raise this alarm. He published an important book in 2020 called To Provide and Maintain a Navy, Why Naval Primacy is America's First Best Strategy. And For those who know a little bit about the Constitution of the United States, the federal government was set up with limited powers. People have kind of forgotten that. But one of the few things the federal government was supposed to do was, quote, to provide and maintain a Navy, and of course, that's exactly what we're not really doing right now. Jerry's book is available at the book signing today. He'll be pleased to sign it for you personally. Captain Hendrix is a retired United States Navy captain and naval flight officer. He served 26 years on active duty, following his commissioning in the Navy through the ROTC program at Purdue University. He served in a variety of maritime patrol aviation squadrons, as well as on our best and biggest supercarriers, including the USS Theodore Roosevelt. He served on light amphibious assault ships. He's been deployed during those years to the Mediterranean, the Red Sea, the North Atlantic, the Caribbean, and the Persian Gulf. He was a commander of a major tactical air support squadron. On shore, he was a strategist on the staffs of the Chief of Naval Operations, the Secretary of the Navy, Undersecretary of Defense for Policy, among other posts. And during these years, he developed a well-earned reputation for using history to illuminate current strategic challenges. He's twice been named the Samuel Eliot Morrison Scholar by the Naval Historical Center. He has worked as a director of the Navy History and Heritage Command, senior fellow at the Center for American Security and other posts. He holds a bachelor's degree in political science from Purdue, a master's in national security from the Naval Postgraduate School, a master's in history from Harvard, and a PhD in war studies from King's College in London. He's the author of numerous professional articles and essays, as well as the 2009 book, Theodore Roosevelt's Naval Diplomacy, and, as I mentioned, to provide and maintain a Navy. With that, we're very pleased to give you an opportunity to hear from Captain Hendrix this morning. Thank you.
There we go. Thank you. I am suffering from a little bit of a head cold, so you'll notice a little bit of a weakness in my voice today, but with the microphones, I think we'll be able to pass through. I want to send my thank yous to the International Churchill Society's leadership team for their invitation, to the members of the Churchill family in attendance today, as well as to Stephen and Jane Paz for sponsoring this distinguished Churchill lecture. This is a great privilege and honor for me to be here. I also want to issue a personal happy birthday greeting to my wife this morning. It was a pretty good deal to be able to bring her to Scotland for her birthday. So Winston Churchill speaks to us today as the greatest statesman of our age, as a superb wartime chief, as a strategist, and as one of the century's leading historians. It's a pretty good amalgamation. He knew who he was. He knew the foundational interests of his nation, and for that matter, the broader English-speaking peoples. Knowing that the times and tides of human nature, he perceived threats before others could detect them. Because of his mastery of the language, he marshaled ideas and the idiom in a profound manner, and eventually moved others to follow him. Sometimes this process took longer than others. Today, I want to focus particular attention upon his wilderness years, or as one biographer stated, his time alone. But not for the purpose of history alone. Rather, as I do this, I wish to draw the attention of two individuals in the audience, imaginary figures, perhaps, to this period and the lessons for today. I wish to address the future British Secretary of State for Defense, the modern equivalent of the First Lord of the Admiralty, and the future Secretary of Defense of the United States, the modern equivalent of the combined offices of Secretary of the Navy and Secretary of War. and I hope that they are both listening closely. In November 1936, Winston Churchill rose in the British House of Commons and stated, quote, "Owing to past neglect in the face of the plainest warnings, we have entered upon a period of danger greater than has befallen Britain since the U-boat campaign was crushed. The era of procrastination, of half measures, of soothing and baffling expedients, of delays is coming to a close. In its place, we are entering a period of consequences." Churchill's words on that day were not listened to, but the consequences he spoke of were both large and proximate for the British people and the world. Churchill in the 1930s was often a member of the majority party, but also personally very much out of power. Despite having served with distinction in 6 cabinets, he found himself at odds with the leaders of his party, Stanley Baldwin and Neville Chamberlain, over India, the budget, and mostly Nazi Germany. His years of researching and writing about the first Duke of Marlborough, as well as his years in the cabinet leading up to and then into World War I, had given him a better perspective, a clearer sense of where trends were leading on the continent of Europe. He understood Lenin, then Stalin, Mussolini, and most importantly, Hitler, better than the men and women around him in the House of Commons, and for that matter, in the House of Lords. He recognized the evils of authoritarianism, communism, fascism, and Nazism for what they truly were, while his opponents, perhaps still traumatized by the generational bloodbath that was World War I, and certainly challenged by the economic conditions brought on by global depression, and lastly, largely focused on retaining power in the House of Commons, did not. When Churchill raised questions about the preparedness of the British military to meet the rising threat of Germany, his party's leaders first asserted that British military possessed sufficient capacity to meet the Nazi threat. When Churchill demonstrably proved that the Nazi military exceeded the British in terms of sheer capacity, his party's leaders then asserted that the British military still exceeded the Nazis in terms of technical capabilities. When Churchill asserted that Nazi capabilities met or exceeded the British in terms of the designs of its fighters, bombers, and submarines, his opponents fell back on arguments that A, Britain could not afford to rearm without significantly destabilizing its economy, and B, Hitler could be negotiated with, that Germany's grievances were real, and that with the right incentives, peace could be maintained. Does any of this sound remotely familiar today? Churchill's opponents were, of course, wrong. Churchill during the 1930s was the only doctor in the global House who correctly diagnosed the deadly danger of virulent authoritarianism in all of its forms: communism, Nazism, and fascism, and the threat that these seemingly disparate ideologies might combine to dominate Europe. He knew the correct prescription. His study of history placed the traditional British grand strategy in the fore, a strategy predicated upon never allowing a single power to dominate the European continent. He also understood that to stand against the Axis powers, the self-labeled Pact of Steel, a grand alliance must be formed with his other great passion, the English-speaking peoples. Such was the consistent accuracy of his observations and predictions that when the crisis that he had predicted arrived, the crown and the realm it protected had no choice but to ask Churchill to come in from the wilderness, to cease acting alone, but rather to take the lead of a unity government and perform the vital operations that were required to save the patient, Great Britain, in its darkest hour. Thus, we turn to the relevance of Churchill today and why we must not only read him, but also attempt to think strategically like him and approach the act of policy formulation like him, leveraging the lessons of history to inform our current decision-making like him. I will not attempt to cover the entire field of international competition. I am not a politician, nor am I an economist, and I am most certainly not a diplomat. So I shall not attempt to cast my net over those fields of study. But I am a naval officer, a strategist, and a historian, and the oceans have captured both my head and my heart for almost 4 decades. There is today a challenge occurring upon the seas that represents an existential threat to the West and the global system of trade and governance that has been in development for the past 4 centuries. This morning, as Churchill once did with far more effectiveness, I will use history to illuminate how the concepts of a free sea and free trade are under assault by the world's rising authoritarian powers, and for a very specific reason that should deeply concern us all. To understand this trend, we must begin at the beginning. In 1609, a Dutch scholar, Hugo Grotius, enunciated the concept of mare liberum, the free sea, in response to a legal challenge by Portugal to the Dutch seizure of a Portuguese commercial ship, the Santa Catarina, in the Western Pacific. Grotius's legal opinion resulted in the Dutch having to pay Portugal a penalty worth the value of the seized ship. But more importantly, it established the legal precedent of the free sea, that men and nations are free to sail their watercraft wherever the winds and their desire for trade and profit lead them, with one proviso, the 2 cannon shot rule, which established the concept of territorial seas to the extent that they can be militarily controlled from shore-based gun batteries. The concept of the free sea begat our understanding of free maritime trade, which served as the foundation for the emerging Enlightenment concepts of freedom and individual liberty. But more importantly, the concept of a free sea and the act of free trade became a vector, a medium to transmit the concepts of freedom across the globe. The idea of a free sea became an aspiration for maritime nations for the next 4 centuries. But it must be understood that it was an idea that existed more in theory than in reality, as the oceans remained a domain dominated by war and piracy during much of this time. It was not until the end of the Napoleonic Wars that a global international system of trade began to emerge, albeit in a very protected sense, in that Great Britain preferenced its own colonies and markets as it created a maritime trading network. But the internal British debates over corn laws and tariffs provided the grist of the mill of free trade arguments that dominated the 20th century. Prior to World War II, there was a competition amongst the great powers upon the world's oceans and within defined spheres of influence. After that war, the only great navies that remained in existence were held by the United States and Great Britain, and it was their common vision of a globalized transoceanic system of free trade that prevailed, and with startling results. Before I can tell you those or describe to you those results, I must first establish a few facts about the link between man and the sea, links that have become so accepted in modern society as to be as assumed as the air we breathe. First, oceans make up 70% of the Earth's surface, a large percentage, but perhaps made more real to you when you consider that we could drop the moon into the Pacific Ocean without it touching either the Americas or the Eurasian continent. It is a vast space. Additionally, nearly 40% of the global population, some 3.4 billion people, live within 60 miles of the sea. What's more, some 80% of our global economy by volume and 70% by value, and valued at just over $100 trillion per year, or 79 trillion British pounds sterling, travels by sea. The results are clear. The relative security of a free sea, as well as the concept of free trade, has resulted in the swiftest expansion of wealth in human history, moving from $12.5 trillion global domestic product in 1945 to the aforementioned $100 trillion GDP today. Now, before the cynical and perhaps even the increasingly popular socialist voice raises the question about whether our lives today, though richer, are really all that much better than our ancestors' lives, let me just add that since 1945, global literacy has risen from 40% to nearly 90% of the population. And the rate of extreme poverty, the percentage of people living on less than $2 a day, has fallen from 70% of the globe's population to under 10%. The average human life expectancy has also risen from 49 years of age in 1950 to 73 years of age in 2021, across the era of the free sea. Much of our modern economic growth has been tied to the number and size of ships plying the ocean's shipping routes. Today, there are far more commercial ships than ever before, but they are also different in their sizes and shapes and designs. For instance, today there are 5 times as many commercial ships plying the world's oceans than there were in 1950. But the gross tonnage of that fleet is 30 times larger. Many of these ships are far more specialized, as oil and liquefied natural gas supertankers, massive container ships carrying over 14,000 containers on each of them, 400,000-ton China Max ore carriers, that's 4 times the size of a nuclear aircraft carrier, and large grain and sugar carriers, as well as chemical tankers, all ever increasing in size and complexity. We have also seen outlandish growth in the size of passenger liners or their modern equivalents, cruise ships. One simple constant to consider is that the larger the ship, the more it can carry, and at a lower net cost per ton per nautical mile. The other fact to consider is that no nation or company would build ships as large as we currently do. No one would risk carrying so many things of so much value in one hull unless the seas were safe to travel on and free to conduct commerce on. This system and these ships were encouraged to expand because the United States Navy and the Royal Navy, to a lesser extent, provided persistent naval presence upon the world's oceans. Both nations ended the last great maritime world war with thousands of warships in their navies, 6,700 ships in the United States Navy, and 2,300 ships in the Royal Navy, although each moved to smaller fleets quickly after the war. The Royal Navy fell to 450 ships by 1950, then 180 by 1970, and continued to contract over the next 40 years, only reversing this trend in the past 10 years. The U.S. Navy after the war contracted to just over 1,000 ships, and then hovered between 900 and 1,000 ships through the 1960s, when the costs of the Vietnam War began to eat into the Navy's budget. This led Ronald Reagan in 1980 to campaign on the idea of building a 600-ship Navy, a primary tool in the Cold War against the Soviet Union, as an instrument that in the end was highly effective. Reagan's Navy surged into the high north, pressuring the Soviet Union near its home waters in both the Atlantic and the Pacific. When the Cold War ended and the Soviet archives were opened to researchers, it was revealed that the American naval buildup, along with other Reagan initiatives such as Star Wars, had been key influencers in the Soviet Union's demise. The United States Navy accomplished this by remaining forward deployed and providing peacetime presence in regions, bases, and partner ports around the world in which it and its ever-expanding constellation of allies had interests. Ultimately, the nation's 6 regional combatant commanders, the 4-star generals and admirals charged with leading the commands such as the Indo-Pacific Command or the European Command, or now AFRICOM, identified 18 maritime regions of the world where the United States' interest and its support to 50 treaty partner interests generated requirements for an average of 130 to 150 ships deployed per day, every day. Now, you might ask, how many ships does a Navy need to keep 130 to 150 ships at sea at any given moment? To understand this, I need to explain the interdeployment training cycle. You see, for every ship on station, there should be 3 other ships behind it. One undergoing deep maintenance in a port or a dry dock. One training, or as we say, working up, just off the coast, getting all of its pre-deployment qualifications accomplished. And one in transit, either proceeding to on station or returning from on station. So to keep 130 to 150 ships at sea, you need a Navy of between 520 and 600 ships. These requirements led to the evolution of the 2 home-base fleets, the 2nd Fleet in the Atlantic coast and the 3rd Fleet on the West Coast and at Pearl Harbor, Hawaii, and 2 forward deployed fleets, the 6th Fleet in the Mediterranean and our 7th Fleet home-based in the Western Pacific, mostly in and around Japan. Ships and their crews were normally trained and maintained in home waters and then deployed to forward fleets where, through a hub-and-spoke method, they serviced the very presence requirements of the Cold War. It was by this method of operation that over the period of 40 years of the Cold War that Mare Liberum was finally achieved and made manifest, leading to a golden transoceanic age of prosperity and growth. But then the Cold War ended. And as the poet W.B. Yeats said, things fall apart, the center cannot hold. The dissolution of the Soviet Union led to a moment of worldwide euphoria. There was a sense, as one great thinker said, of the end of history. The idea that the competition between ideologies and isms had come to an end, and that democratic capitalism had emerged triumphant globally. As Churchill would have known, however, this was unrealistic and led to a series of assumptions that produced our situation today, in which the global system that we've spent some 400 years creating is now in peril. The free sea was the assumed condition across the globe in 1989. To be sure, there were other competing ideas, but the dominance of the U.S. Navy at just under 600 ships was clear. It was larger and more combat effective than all other naval fleets in the world combined. What the United States said at sea was the rule, and we said we believed in a free sea and free trade, and so that belief became the governing rule. We also demonstrated our abilities on the seas and from the seas. In 1990 and 1991, and I want you to pay attention to this statement. In 1990 and 1991, we assembled a 500,000 man military force, half a world away in the Middle East, most of which was transported to the region not by air, but by sea. Half a decade later, when China began to threaten Taiwan, which was quickly evolving into a capitalist democracy, possessing an incredibly vibrant economy, we sailed an aircraft carrier strike group through the Taiwan Strait to demonstrate our support for that island nation. And yes, I use that word deliberately. We moved where we wanted to, when we wanted to, and we projected power ashore up to 1,000 miles from the seacoast with ease, and this was noted. But even as we eagerly declared a peace dividend and began to formulate bottom-up reviews, or BRRs, and base realignment and closure commissions, or BRACs, to enable us to slash the military broadly and the Navy specifically, our competitors were watching. They watched as we cut the American fleet by 100 ships, mostly old frigates and cruisers, even as we fought Desert Storm in 1991. 100 ships gone, 1 year. They watched as we continued to slash the fleet during the following decade, crashing through the 300-ship barrier in 2001, even as terrorists attacked both the Pentagon and the World Trade Center. And we went to war again, half a world and 2 oceans away. They watched as the Navy continued to shrink, even as we spent more on it, because the cost to operate the smaller fleet continuously at a high tempo took money that could have been spent on building new ships or modernizing older ones. Let me explain that statement. During the wars in Afghanistan and Iraq, our Navy continued to try to keep around 115 ships at sea around the clock, even though our battle force was less than 300 ships. We actually needed about 450 ships to accomplish this task, but we did it by shortening our maintenance and training periods. In other words, we tried to do more with less. The result was what we call a death spiral, in which we used up the whole lives of our declining inventory of ships, resulting in a smaller fleet that was used more, accelerating the trend of material decline and combat ineffectiveness, resulting in the accidents of 2017, when 3 of our ships were involved in collisions at sea that resulted in the deaths of American sailors, and 1 additional ship grounded itself due to poor training and poor material conditions. It is clear that at some point in the mid to late 1990s, first China and then Russia, both traditional continental land powers. I want you to look at that chart too, because you see how these 2 empires came together through the continuous acquisition of territories around them to give them additional buffer space. So when you see Russia and Ukraine today, it's just Russia being Russia. This is what they've done for 1,000 years. But also we need to keep in mind, this is China being China, because this is what they've done for 3,000 years. So both first China and then Russia, both traditional continental land powers, began to alter their strategies and to invest in new capabilities, both shore-based and sea-based, that sought to negate America's mastery of the seas and to undermine the notion of a free sea. Having seen what we could do projecting power from the sea and our predilection for imposed regime changes, they wanted to ensure that we could not use our naval might to get close enough to their shores to influence events inside their countries or to constrain their aggressive designs on their neighbors. To avoid this, they began to invest in a series of investments which are called anti-access area denial capabilities, such as modern long-range bombers, advanced nuclear fast attack submarines, and missiles, lots of missiles, to include China's DF-21 carrier killer and the DF-26 Guam killer missiles. What's more, these powers, who share a deep historical and cultural animosity for each other, but also a philosophical tie, along with their junior partners in Iran and North Korea, in their subscription to an authoritarian, totalitarian approach to governing, these powers have a real problem with the concept of the free sea and free trade. Because, as I previously said, these provide a vector to transmit the concept of freedom to their people. They don't believe in the free market. All of China's investments in foreign markets in terms of both purchasing raw materials or negotiating the sales of finished products are focused upon assured, centrally planned economic outcomes. They don't want the great Scottish economist Adam Smith's hidden hand deciding the allocation of resources. They want to make those decisions. Russia wants to corner and control the energy and grain markets. They want predictability and stability. It's the only way they can continue to exist. And so they look at the sea and they need to exert control over it. China has attempted to extend its territorial seas by assigning to Extended Economic Zones, EEZs, a new region in the maritime lexicon created by the United Nations Law of the Sea, aspects of sovereignty that are not contained in the original formulation. Russia has attempted to extend its territorial baseline claims over vast areas of the Arctic Ocean, seeking to claim those portions of it as internal waters, as if somehow the Arctic Ocean was analogous to the United States' Mississippi River Basin as internal waters. China's communists even dusted off a 70-year-old map. There dusted off a 70-year-old map, the so-called nine-dash line map, created by their nationalist Chinese enemies to assert legal claim over the entire South China Sea, and then made a point of ignoring a legal ruling from the International Tribunal at The Hague when it went against them. Recently, both nations have taken military actions to support these legal and strategic claims. Beyond creating the bombers and missiles that I mentioned earlier, the People's Liberation Army Navy, and that's a mouthful, has taken the fastest and most expansive naval buildup since World War II. They are building a new warship every 5 weeks. China today has 19 shipyards, 19, where these ships are being built, even as these same shipyards are building and maintaining the largest commercial fleet in the world. The largest of these, the Jingnan Yard, has more shipbuilding construction capacity than all of the United States' shipyards combined. In the early 1980s, the United States made an ideological decision to pull government support from its commercial shipbuilding industries, a decision that has seen the size of our merchant fleet shrink to the point that we are ranked 22nd in the world. This has taken profits away from the American market that would have been earned by carrying our exports to foreign markets or carrying our imports from those markets into our shores. But it also has had the ancillary effect of doubling the cost of American Navy warships. We've been building the same type of ship, the Arleigh Burke-class destroyer, since the late 1980s. It now costs twice as much to build the same ship because of the lack of labor and the lack of small part suppliers. No competition with the market, prices go up. Russia, which possesses a smaller defense budget, a smaller industrial base, and a smaller navy, has nonetheless invested in certain high-end niche naval capabilities to include highly advanced deep diving submarines. It has also invested in nuclear-powered armed icebreakers that can effectively control the high north. Russia has a fleet of more than 40 icebreakers, 7 of which are nuclear-powered, and 3 more under construction presently. Russia also began to build a new class of armed Arctic patrol ships, with 1 in the water, 1 launching next year, and 2 more under construction. The United States, despite the growing importance of the Arctic, has 1 broken down 40-year-old icebreaker, which is operated by our Coast Guard on a shoestring budget that is unarmed. In fact, the United States Navy itself has not built an Arctic-rated surface warship since the 1950s. And our Arctic-rated nuclear-powered submarine fleet that once dominated the high north is dwindling as our Los Angeles-class fast attack submarines are retired. Soon we will only have 3 Seawolf-class submarines that will be qualified to operate under the thicker ice of the Arctic cap year-round. To save on cost per hull, we did not reinforce the hulls of our new Virginia-class submarines, and so they are not qualified to operate under the Arctic during winter conditions. Both China and Russia have stated their explicit intentions to deny us the use of the free seas, to turn the seas and oceans near their shores from mare liberum to mare clausum, to ensure their own internal political stability and the expansion of their global influence. They understand that they need to only succeed in only 1 or 2 places, the Arctic Ocean or the South China Sea, to effectively destroy the concept of the free sea and the global economic system of free trade that it undergirds. They can do this because we lost sight of the foundational importance of the global oceans in our way of life. We became confident that the economic growth from free trade that we had created would lead all nations to want to be like us. We assumed that the oceans were free and always would be, actively ignoring history and Churchill's warnings. We assumed that authoritarians would voluntarily give up power, that darkness would gradually dull to grays and then turn to light. We allowed our navies and the industrial base that maintains them to shrink. Today, we no longer have a fleet, even if we combine the capacities of both the United States Navy and the Royal Navy, to be in all the places we need to be persistently to uphold the global economic system. We have had to gap key areas of interest and then surge in when a crisis erupts rather than deterring crises on a day-to-day basis. But finding, ladies and gentlemen, that we cannot surge trust. Local allies and potential allies who once thought us a persistent, reassuring presence in their lives will not retain their belief in us based upon an annual or biannual visit. We have, in short, invited the current competition through our dedicated adherence to military weakness and overwhelming belief that the other guy wanted access to our markets. We now fear disruption in that market, and we also place other priorities, such as our desires to get China's buy-in to our strategy of addressing global warming ahead of our local economy and national security. The bottom line is that neither Xi nor Putin care about global warming. And they don't hunger for access to our markets. They want to be the market. And they want it to be a centrally controlled and authoritarian market. So what can Sir Winston tell us about our current situation? Which is to say, how can our understanding of history inform our approach to current strategic environment and of the blooming garden of threats? He would tell us that we must choose a strategy and choose it wisely. Then, as now, we must move to ensure that no great power gains or retains control over the great Eurasian world island. In his great biography of John Churchill, he spoke of the prevailing strategy of Marlborough's day, of the periphery against the center, a strategy that took advantage of Britain's sea power to land equipment and troops in an expeditionary manner, where and when it wanted to, as well as providing succor and support to its allies upon the continent. I think it's important to understand that today, with both Ukraine and Taiwan, two nations that I personally support, we are following this strategy and should continue to do so, though perhaps a bit more strongly. Sir Winston himself espoused this same approach, first to Wilhelmine Germany, then Nazi Germany, and later against the Soviet Union. We should look today at the increasing closeness between China and Russia with great concern, but make no mistake about it, Russia is very much the junior partner, almost to the point of dependency in this relationship. Sir Winston, I think, might tell us to pick our domain or domains in this case. For far too long, the United States has had the material wealth and resources to be all things to all peoples, acting both as a great continental power with boots on the ground on virtually every continent except Antarctica, and we probably would have gone there if we'd figured out how, as well as a great sea power with ships patrolling vital areas of interest on every ocean. We can no longer do that alone. As Great Britain found after World War II and the dissolution of its empire, Americans have found that there are limits to what we can accomplish, or at least limits on our credit cards. Decades of near continuous war and 3 generations of profligate spending without accompanying sacrifice and raised taxes have led to a national debt of $31 trillion, amounting to 1.5 times our gross domestic product. Now, in Sir Winston's words, now is our time, our period of consequences. Now is our time for choosing, and choose we must. Unable to be all things to all peoples, we must choose between land and sea, or perhaps in the more modern sense, between the continents and the great global commons, the seas, the air, space, and cyberspace, where, and make no mistake about it, the next conflict will be played out. With nuclear arms proliferating amongst all the great powers, I do not expect or recommend that we invade China anytime soon, nor do I expect that they will land en masse on North America. but we must be prepared to move from the periphery of the global commons against the continental land center by operating just off of and supporting nations like South Korea, Japan, Taiwan, the Philippines, Ukraine, Poland, and the Baltics. No, the next war will occur in the commons, and that is where we must make our great investments. Regarding the Navy and our naval investments, I believe that the U.S. Navy needs to grow from its present battle force of 297 ships to a force of at least 450. But the Navy of tomorrow must not look like the Navy of today, for if it does, we will have made a dreadful mistake. No, the force of tomorrow should seek a balance between the low-end peace preservation force, which should be made up of smaller, cheaper frigates, which can access more ports around the globe, and high-end, highly lethal nuclear-powered submarines stuffed with the latest weapons in our arsenal, long-range conventional prompt strike hypersonic missiles, and medium-range anti-ship missiles. These submarines, operating stealthily from beneath the waves, will have the ability to blind our enemy's sensors ashore, negating their investments in long-range ballistic missiles that can target and hit our great capital vessels at sea. The Royal Navy should similarly double its size as well as diversifying its force structure. Now, about the topic of naval force structure, no, I'm going to skip that. We're getting a little bit long here. To accomplish these goals, we will need to take a much closer look at our industrial bases of our two nations. After the Cold War, each allowed our aircraft industries, shipyards, and aviation and ship repair yards to contract to a shocking extent. We need to reverse these trends. We need to inflate our industrial base, and we need to do so in a rapid and strategically coordinated fashion. To accomplish this, we need to establish both a military industrial policy as well as someone to oversee its implementation. Prior to World War II, Sir Winston advocated for a war minister who would oversee all aspects of military reindustrialization. Both of our nations need something similar today with the full backing of the U.S. Congress and the British Parliament. Finally, we must seek to emulate Churchill's perspicacity and willingness to see the world clearer than truth. We must move beyond the idealism of our age and see events for what they are. In Churchill's years in the wilderness, it was the absorption of Austria, the Sudetenland, Czechoslovakia, and Poland into the Third Reich. Today, it is the stop and start momentum of authoritarian states as they subjugated Tibet and Hong Kong. They practiced genocide upon the Uyghurs and invaded and annexed portions of Georgia, Crimea, and finally Ukraine. I'm aware that there are sophisticated voices in the international circles who shout, "Hey, not everyone's Hitler," and they would be correct. But they are correct only if you believed in graduated scales of evil, that sometimes darkness is blacker than black, and I'm also aware that the Ukrainians and the Uyghurs and the Tibetans don't really care about sophistication and nuance today, and the Taiwanese won't care about it tomorrow. Churchill's predecessors at number 10 Downing Street, Ramsay MacDonald, Stanley Baldwin, and Neville Chamberlain, had all prided themselves in their no-nonsense, business-like approach to governing both in domestic and international programs. They fought to balance their budgets in the depths of the Great Depression, avoiding the stimulus spending being promoted by John Maynard Keynes, and supported the British pound sterling as the international exchange currency, all the while telling their citizens that they could create an ever-expanding welfare state while remaining safe in the world. They supported many of these programs by cutting defense spending and seeking conciliation with Germany over its grievances with the Versailles Treaty. We hear many similar voices today arguing that the rise of China as the leading economic and military power is inevitable, and that we should not only negotiate some form of economic settlement with the Chinese Communist Party and its vassal, Putin's Russia, but also amend the global economic order to reflect some characteristics of Chinese central planning, to include measures associated with China's security state as a means of assuring both growth and stability. I think that Churchill would recognize the foolishness of this approach, and so should we. Rather, we should take our lead from his grand strategy and seek to keep a single power or combination of authoritarian states from gaining preponderant control of the great Eurasian continent, I believe our two nations, representative of the great English-speaking peoples, along with other nations such as Australia, Japan, and India, nations that were bred to the sea, should combine our efforts to provide and maintain our navies in such a manner as to assure both China and Russia that their aggressions on land will not be successful and that their nations will decline without access to the seas and its vital lines of trade. So, for the two individuals in the audience who I hope to reach with this lecture, the future British Secretary of State for Defense and the future Secretary of Defense in the United States, I hope that you can see and understand our current geostrategic position in the world, as well as the emerging threat. I believe that the threat from authoritarian states bent on established centralized control, not only over our economies, but over our individual lives, is proximate and real. I hope the two of you agree with my diagnosis and will consider my prescription of increased investment in our naval and maritime capabilities. Thank you. Apparently, we have time for a few questions.
Oh, it's on. Excuse me very much. So we have Gail, John. If you want to go to Gail's sheet in the blue, we have time for just a few questions. Raise your hand, Gail. Great. I'll come to you, and then we have time just for a few. Thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
Captain, thank you for your compelling and sobering view of both our nations' navies. What would you say to those who are similarly patriotic and similarly worried about the future of the English-speaking peoples, but who say that in the 21st century, space is the new ocean? So how do you respond to those who are competing for military budgets with the Air Force and Space Force, and who look at the recent success of, for instance, Starlink in the Ukraine, and say that that's where we should be making our future defense investments?
So if I was to be king for the day and wrote the defense budget for the United States, you know, I would fund the Navy to its maximum extent, then I would fund the Air Force, both its long-range strike potential, as well as the Space Force. Because as we think about space in active military terms, you know, we fight wars through space all the time. We have missiles that go from land to land that pass through space. We have space to Earth type capabilities. And we're now making investments in space-to-space capabilities. And it's an area where we've been behind. The Chinese and the Russians are both in the lead of us right now in space-to-space capabilities. And so we need to make those investments and understand that space is one of these four global commons that I mentioned: the sea, air, space, and cyberspace. And by the way, we are at war right now in cyberspace. Every day there is active combat going on between Russia and the West.
Thank you, Jerry. Thank you very much. A question right here.
Captain, if we, in the current state of martial vigor in the United States, or perhaps the lack thereof, if we had these ships, who would man them?
That's a great question. So we are having problems with recruitment right now. Every service in the United States military, with the exception of the Marine Corps, hoorah, did not meet its recruiting goals this year. I think that there is some confusion in marketing on what military service is. I will tell you that when I joined the military during the Reagan administration, so that tells you how old I am, you know, I entered with the sense, in the way it was sold to me, that this was a vocation. This wasn't a job, this was a calling. And I'm not sure that that type of terminology is understood as well today. I serve with some great sailors. I don't want to diminish them. But I'm saying that the culture in which we grow up, the idea of vocational service, the idea of being of service, of nation before self, is no longer as large a part of our national conversation. And I think that we have to get back to that. That's one of the reasons why I love Churchill and why I love reading him, is this sense of being part of something greater than yourself permeates his writing.
John, go ahead, John.
Yes, sir. What a great presentation. A scary one, but one. Have you had an opportunity to share your thoughts and your position with any of, before today, with any of the leaders of the governments of the United States or UK, as far as the concerns? Are there people in these governments that share your view? I have to hope to believe that you're not the only one who's concerned.
I've had a chance to meet with senior officials in the current administration as well as the past administration in the United States. I've been in to see the Secretary of the Navy just in the last 2 months. And I'm going in to see our new Chief of Naval Operations upon my return, who actually is my old office mate. We were both captains together working for Secretary Ray Mavis years ago. So Lisa Franchetti is a wonderful officer, and I'm looking forward to having a chance to sit down and chat with her. I have not had a chance to speak with the British Royal Navy, and I'd love to do that. I'd love to come over and consult with them.
How about politicians of both governments?
So I've been up on Capitol Hill. So I've met with members of both parties, both in the House and the Senate. I've not met with members of the House of Commons.
Some agree with your position?
Oh, absolutely. And on both sides. Both sides of the aisle, yes.
Jerry, thank you. Thank you very much. We're now going to present Jerry with a very quick a gift on behalf of the bosses.
Thank you for sponsoring that. It's just great, tremendous opportunity.
So, Jerry, thank you very much. We really hope these lectures inform and inspire, and I think you've done both. And on behalf of the International Churchill Society, Jane and I are pleased to present you with this bust of Sir Winston. Thank you.
I'm so tickled. Thank you. I can't tell you how pleased I am with this.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Wonderful presentation.
Thank you.
Hi, everyone. It's pretty loud. My name is Justin Reash. I'm the executive director of the International Churchill Society in the United States. And Jerry, I want to thank you. Incredibly uplifting presentation to begin the sessions. I don't know about you. I feel so much more secure at night. And when I'm in the Arctic, I just can't wait to see the United States submarines coming around. So, but everyone, thank you very much for joining us here in Edinburgh for the 40th International Churchill Conference. I've seen so many familiar faces, but I've also seen new faces, which is really great. Thank you. We have attendees from all over the world, from right here in Edinburgh to Brazil, and that's really a testament to our global organization. And we at the Society, we thank you for your support and for your attendance of this conference, which has always been the preeminent annual conference in the world examining the life and legacy of Sir Winston Churchill. And from a personal perspective, this is a milestone for me. It was 10 years ago that I attended my first conference. I was a young man hired by a great friend named Lee Pollock, who brought me into this organization, and somehow I haven't been able to leave it. Or I came back, I left and I came back, and but it's something that always has this attraction for me. So the Society, for all its reach and impact, can often feel like a large global family, and that's something that we really take pride in. And so family, before I update you from Washington, let me just quickly say, I'm so sorry about the bust last night. I know it was not a great start, and for all of the trouble that you had, thank you for displaying the Churchillian attitude and the Churchillian value, right, of resilience and optimism. And that's what I hope we continue to instill in our attendees. But I'm just going to give you a few quick facts about the Society, and then we're going to go to break. And that break will go from 10:40 to right at 11 a.m. But let me begin quickly, and I think this is the slide button. Oh, this is really cool. Okay, so quickly about our membership in global chapters. So we have just under 3,400 dues-paying members in 40 countries on 6 continents. And we have 39 affiliated chapters in 9 countries on 5 continents. And our newest chapter was in Norway. And there's a man here, if you haven't yet met him, named Hans. And Hans, if you could raise your hand. Hans, thank you very much. So Hans hosted his first event, in September, And he is already growing his membership, and it's our first chapter ever in Norway. So it just shows that Churchill's impact and the society's impact continues to grow. And Hans and every other chapter president who's here and who's not here, thank you very much for your volunteerism. And I also like to thank these chapter presidents who I do know are in person. So that's Jim Drury from Nashville, Vince Benedetto in Pennsylvania, and Ricardo Sonderman from Porto Alegre in Brazil. Gentlemen, thank you very much. These volunteers are truly leading from the front, which is what Churchill did so many times. So in 2023, thus far was a year of great global events for the Society. This spring, the Churchill Society of Pennsylvania, led by Vince Benedetto, hosted its first event aboard the USS New Jersey in Philadelphia. So this doesn't do it justice, this photo. This battleship is massive. And it was an incredible event to have, and me and my staff were really privileged to go. And in March, the Churchill Society of Tennessee hosted a symposium at Vanderbilt University. And in April, the newly formed Florida Gulf Coast chapter hosted former ICS Executive Director Lee Pollock for a luncheon. So these events are but a few hosted by the chapters and our volunteers worldwide. However, it was in mid-June that the Society hosted one of its most significant events for some time. On June 16th, the Society co-hosted an event to unveil a new statue of Sir Winston Churchill in St. John Cap Ferrat on the French Riviera. It is the first full-size statue of Churchill depicting him what he loved to do most, which is painting. And this was created by the unbelievably talented artist Paul Rafferty, and this statue will forever sit in the port of one of the locales that Churchill loved to visit and attend. And I mean, so Paul is a painter. Look at this statue. It is absolutely incredible, the detail. Now, attendees, I have to tell you, it was really hard work going to the south of France for 5 days. You know, we were surrounded by good people and even better champagne, and I have to tell you that we undertook this work with humility, in toughness and grit, and we had no fun whatsoever. So let me move to the National Churchill Leadership Center, which is at the George Washington University. So each year, the NCLC hosts 2 annual research fellows. This year, our research fellows are Se-Yeon Moon on the left and Yang Yoon on the right. So Se-Yeon is interested in researching the policy implications of the growing artificial intelligence industry, and she's an undergraduate. Yi-Young is a graduate fellow, and she is comparing the wartime speeches of Winston Churchill to the rhetoric of President Volodymyr Zelensky in Ukraine. So these students are part of the exciting next generations of scholars who are seeking to explore this evergreen legacy of Sir Winston Churchill. We also host numerous in-person and virtual events each year, and this past year we hosted a seminar with the G.W. Elliott School of International Affairs to discuss the 1-year anniversary of the invasion of Ukraine. And we also hosted the British political commentator Ian Dale, which was a lot of fun, to say the least. And lastly, this bottom right photo is Speaker of the House Nancy Pelosi raising a toast to the birthday of Sir Winston Churchill. This reception has been hosted in the Capitol every year since 2013, when we donated a bust of Churchill in a wonderful ceremony. And as many of our American listeners probably know, we currently don't have a Speaker of the House in the United States Capitol, but it's going to happen regardless. And so we will continue this really wonderful tradition. And allow me to close by saying that, again, a very heartfelt thank you. A heartfelt thank you for attending, for taking time out of your busy lives, for traveling this far, or even very close from where you are. And it really means a lot to us in society for your support. And again, we're Churchillians, we're resilient, we're optimistic, and we're not going to let a bus bring us down. So let me, before I encourage you all to take a quick 20-minute break, and please do keep it quick because we want to stay on schedule with our next session beginning at 11, a few housekeeping items. The escalators are now, that you came up, they're now reversed to take you back downstairs for coffee and tea. The break, again, the break, please limit it to 20 minutes. Please come back at 11. And honestly, stand up, stretch your legs, but if you don't need that second cup of coffee, or if you don't need to use the restroom, I would encourage you to stay in the auditorium so we can stay on track. There is a restroom on this level by the elevators. But then very lastly, we have an auction, which you may have seen. And I encourage you to participate because those funds go directly to supporting this conference and this organization. And this auction has wonderful, unique items, such as, and I'm just pulling two out, one of the hands, there's a cast of the hand of the Rafferty statue of him painting in Capt. This is one of, it's one of 18 limited editions. I encourage you to get one, if you can. But then lastly, our good friend Jim Muller, who unfortunately isn't here, he wrote this incredible revised edition of the River War. And there was a run of 50 leather-bound copies. The only copy remaining for you to purchase, at least that I'm aware of, is in this auction. And it's numbered. I believe it's number 16 of 50. So if you really want to add that to your collection, and I know my wife who's here would hate me if I bought it, so I probably will not win it out. Please participate. Thank you for your support, and please, we'll see you back at 11 o'clock. Thank you.